What was something you saw you were definitely not supposed to see? Story number 1. I live in a courtyard with 3 apartment buildings. My building has 4 two-bedroom apartments. The landlady lives in another of the buildings in a 1-bedroom. Across the street, the landlady's son lives in an apartment building of his own. The apartment next door to me houses a couple 33 male and 28 female, with their children 10 female and 4 male. They're immigrants and have a long-standing relationship with the landlady. They pay a slightly lower rent and they manage the buildings when she travels, like 6 months out of the year. The guy runs a construction crew, so he does odd jobs and his wife stays at home. All this to say, the families know each other. There's a class difference, which is important to these people, but they've been in each other's orbit for years. When I moved in, my neighbor was pregnant with a little boy. He's pretty light-skinned. For context, these peoples are of South Asian descent. Dark brown complected, lots of babies grow into their color, so no bait. For years later, he's still notably lighter than his cis and parents. My mom told me that there were rumors circulating about the kid's paternity, but I am not one to get into people's business or in that kind of drama, so I didn't pay attention. And then I get a look at the supposed father. This happens when the boy is probably 2. The landlady's son comes to see his mom, and I was leaving the courtyard. The little boy looks a lot like him. Most telling is the coloring they share. I would later see his own children. His son and the neighbors could be brothers. My mom makes friends with the neighbors, and we become somewhat close. I have my own baby. We interact regularly. One day I'm taking my daughter out in her stroller. I pop over to tell the neighbor I'm leaving, as I normally do. Her door is open, but her screen door is closed. She's sitting on the ground, staring up at the landlady's son, who is playing with her, possibly his son. The look on her face. I've never seen such naked longing and happiness on someone outside of the movies. I felt like I was intruding on a super private moment. Her eyes lit up, and she looked years younger. It was definitely a aha moment. He wasn't even looking at her, and I'm sure she didn't realize she had that look on her face. I quietly backed away without saying anything and left. She's never said anything to me about her son's paternity. But there was some scandal when someone sent a pic of the man and her son, side by side, to her husband, and the confrontation was apparently ugly. I look at her sometimes and I remember that unguarded moment and know that I definitely wasn't supposed to see it. Story number 2. About 2 years ago, there was a fire in a high-rise apartment building across the street from where I was living. My boyfriend and I had friends living in the apartment building, so we rushed outside to see if we could find them. From our house, we couldn't see which floor the fire was on, but judging from the smoke, it appeared it was close to the top floor. Anyways, the apartment was mostly evacuated, and we did finally meet up with our friends who were unhurt. We were standing around with the crowd when a woman ran up to the firefighters and shouted, "My daughter, my daughter." Someone caught her as she collapsed to her knees in the street, crying and shrieking. A paramedic eventually escorted her away from the scene to an ambulance as the firefighters brought out a woman strapped to a stretcher. We all thought this was the daughter, but then a firefighter came out of the 14th floor window with a small child in his arms. It was a young girl, and he carefully handed her to his partner to take down the ladder to safety, before disappearing back into the apartment as the second firefighter carried her slowly down the ladder. More than a few of us wondered why he was taking so long. As he neared the ground, a collective gasp went up from the crowd. The little girl was limp and looked as though she was asleep, but on closer inspection, we could see that her skin was gray-blue in color. The firefighter put the girl on a stretcher, and the paramedics began a half-hearted attempt at CPR to appease the crowd as they rushed to the ambulance, but they knew, as we all did in our hearts, that the little girl had perished in the fire. Not long afterwards, a stretcher was brought out of the building with a large man on it. He, too, was blue-gray in color. This time no attempt at CPR was made, as he was wheeled away to the ambulance. It was later reported in the newspaper that the man on stretcher was the girl's father. The little girl had been playing with the stove and had hidden in a closet. Because she thought her parents would be angry with her, he had died trying to save her, even though he had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair. Story number 3. When I was in college, I worked at an arcade mini-golf joint that seemed to give zero fucks about actually making money but was never in any kind of financial trouble when I got hired. The owner literally said, "I pay minimum wage and I expect to get minimum work for it." I worked the front counter and collected money for the mini-golf and sold cups of coins, or you could just use the coin changer. The till was completely busted and would be off by $50 or more in either direction, no matter what you did. I realized very quickly that I could just pretend to ring up golf fees and cups of token S and pocket the cash, so I'd pocket $30 to $40 every shift and nobody seemed to give a shit. One of the assistant managers let me take a break 20 minutes after. I'd just taken a break because some of my friends had shown up and wanted to smoke a bowl with me. He was like, "That is totally more important than your job." It was awesome. Then one day I walked into the owner's office while his secretary was recording figures in the ledger I can read upside down pretty well, and it was very obvious that the figures she was recording had fuck all to do with the business we were doing. We sold maybe $60 of golf fees a night and maybe $100 in coin cups, but she was recording $600 and $1,000 for each. I commented on the discrepancy and quipped about how someone would think we were in the laundry business, and she got really squirrely and told me to leave the office. The next day, the owner called me into his office, and we had a very circumspect conversation about how much I was enjoying working there and enjoying the perks of the job. And I very much got the sense that he was trying to decide if I was going to tell anyone anything. Apparently, he decided I wasn't, and so I kept working there. About a year later, the owner was arrested for money laundering, and we all got fired. Still the best job I ever had. The mob isn't a plus employer would work in fake business again. Story number 4. My dad once handed me his tablet and suggested I look at a book or something while we were sitting around in a theater waiting for a play to start. I don't know if I misunderstood him or what, because when I brought up his Amazon Reader app, I saw that the last book he had been reading was How to Deal with a Sexless Marriage or something along those lines. Dad was very embarrassed, quickly took the tablet back, and we did not speak of what had just transpired. Another time, Dad handed me his phone and asked me to look up something for him while we were sitting around the living room at a family get-together. When I opened his browser app, the last page open was porn. The video began auto-playing, and I frantically tried to figure out how to close the tab, but all I really managed to do was look at the video for far longer than I wanted to. So I shoved the phone back at my dad and said, "You need to close the tab. I can't figure out how. I'm sorry," and we once again did not speak of what had just transpired. There were also another couple of times where I went to use his computer and there was either a bunch of porn open in his browser or some kind of porn in the CD tray.